The morning sun slipped through tall glass windows, lighting up the polished marble floor of a two-story suburban home. The place gleamed, everything in its place, everything meant to impress. Ethan Turner liked it that way. At 34, he had built a life that looked perfect from the outside. A high-paying corporate job, a luxury car, and a spotless reputation. To anyone looking in, he was the picture of success, confident, stylish, and admired. But beneath that charm was something sharp and restless, a constant need to prove he was better than everyone else. Across the breakfast table sat Lila, his wife of 5 years. She was soft-spoken and gentle, her smile the quiet kind that reached her eyes even when her heart was tired. While Ethan came from wealth and ambition, Lila came from simplicity. A small town, a farm, and a family who believed love was worth more than money. She stirred her coffee, hesitating before speaking. "Dad's turning 60 next week," she said softly. "They're planning a little gathering. I thought we could drive up this weekend." Ethan didn't look up from his tablet. "Again? Leila, we just saw them a few months ago." "They miss you," she said carefully. "And I promised Mom." He cut her off with a short laugh. "Lila, your parents live in a town with one grocery store and cows for neighbors." "What could I possibly miss there?" Her smile faded. She had learned to swallow her disappointment, to keep peace rather than start another argument. But his words still landed heavy, like stones on her chest. "You know they don't judge you," she said after a pause. They just don't get it," Ethan interrupted again, tapping his tablet with irritation. "Your dad works sunup to sundown and still can't afford decent shoes. Your brother's a mechanic who can barely keep a shop running. I'm not saying that's wrong, but it's not my world, Lila. You knew that when you married me." Lila looked down at her coffee. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it. She had married him because she believed in his heart. The same heart that once held tenderness and laughter. Somewhere along the way, that warmth had hardened into pride. A silence filled the room, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Then Ethan sighed, lowering his tablet. "Fine, I'll go, but let's make it quick. One night, maybe 2? Lila nodded, forcing a grateful smile though her chest ached. "Thank you," she whispered. As he got up to leave for work, Ethan kissed her on the forehead, distracted, as if performing a duty rather than an act of love. The door shut behind him, and she stood alone in the echoing quiet. Her gaze wandered to the mantel where a small framed photo sat, her family standing in front of their old farmhouse. They were smiling wide, sunburned and happy, with dirt on their hands and love in their eyes. It was the kind of happiness Ethan had never understood. Lila picked up the frame, brushing a speck of dust from its corner. "They're good people," she whispered to herself. "If only you could see that." That evening, as the city lights came alive outside their window, Ethan sat at his desk reviewing numbers and reports. He didn't notice the framed photo Lila had quietly placed beside his laptop, a gentle reminder of where she came from and where love still lived without pride. He sighed, turning away from it. "Just one weekend," he muttered under his breath. "I can survive that." But deep inside, something unsettled stirred, a tension he couldn't name. He didn't know it yet, but the trip he dreaded would soon shatter everything he thought he knew about success, love, and what truly makes a man rich. The drive to Lila's hometown stretched for hours, long highways fading into narrow country roads. The city skyline disappeared behind them, replaced by open fields, weathered barns, and the smell of soil after morning rain. Lila sat quietly in the passenger seat, her hands folded on her lap. She glanced at Ethan, who drove with one hand on the wheel, sunglasses on, the other tapping impatiently against the steering column. He hadn't said much since they left. "Almost there," she said softly. trying to break the silence. "Yeah," he muttered, eyes fixed on the road. "Does your dad still keep that old truck? The one that sounds like it's coughing up smoke?" Lila smiled faintly. "He fixed it up last year." "Runs better than ever," Ethan chuckled dryly. "Of course he did." When they finally turned down the dirt driveway leading to her parents' home, the air changed, calm, slower, full of life. A wooden fence lined the property, with chickens pecking near the porch and a faded wind chime singing in the breeze. The front door burst open before they even stopped. Her father, a strong man with sun-browned skin and kind eyes, waved them in with both hands. "There's my girl!" he shouted. "And you brought Ethan! Welcome home, son!" Ethan forced a polite smile as Lila's mother came out, wiping her hands on her apron, beaming from ear to ear. She hugged him tightly before he could react. Inside, the house smelled of baked bread and lavender. It was small, nothing like their sleek, modern home, but every inch of it was alive with warmth. Family photos covered the walls, and the old clock above the fireplace ticked steadily, as if time itself was unhurried here. Lila's grandmother sat by the window, knitting. Her silver hair framed a face that carried decades of grace. She looked up and smiled. "You finally came back, my dear. And you brought the man of the house." Ethan offered a stiff nod. "Yes, ma'am." As they sat down for lunch, laughter filled the air. Lila's brother, Tom, a young mechanic with grease-stained hands and a heart as open as his smile, cracked jokes that made everyone laugh. Except Ethan, who kept checking his phone under the table. When Lila's father began talking about his farm, his voice carried pride. "We've had a good season," he said, showing photos of his crops on an old flip phone. "It's not much, but it keeps us going." Ethan glanced at the pictures, then forced a small laugh. "That's nice. Looks like a good hobby." The table went quiet. Lila looked down, pretending to sip her water. Her father only smiled, calm and patient. "It's more than a hobby, son. It's how we live. You learn to work hard, and you thank God for what you get." Tom tried to lighten the mood. "Hey, Ethan, maybe I'll put you to work fixing tractors before you leave." Ethan smirked. "I'd rather stick to my office battles, thanks." The rest of the meal passed with uneven laughter, the kind that tried to cover awkward silence. Later that afternoon, Lila's father took Ethan outside for a walk. The sun dipped low, painting the fields gold. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, gesturing toward the land. Ethan shrugged. "It's peaceful." Her father's voice softened. "I know it's not the life you're used to, but there's a certain kind of wealth here too. Not in money, but in moments." Ethan looked away, uncomfortable. "Sure, but you can't buy much with moments." The old man chuckled quietly, his eyes kind but knowing. "Maybe not, but they buy peace, and peace is harder to earn than dollars." They walked back toward the porch, where the grandmother watched them. As Ethan passed, she reached out and touched his hand. Her voice was soft but steady. "A man's worth isn't measured by what he owns," she said, "but by what he keeps alive in others." Her words lingered in the air like a quiet echo. Ethan didn't reply. He didn't know how. That evening, as everyone gathered around for tea, Lila's father brought out a small wooden heart, smooth and carved by hand, its edges worn with age. "Your grandfather made this for your grandmother," he told Ethan. "It's been in our family for 3 generations. Reminds us that love outlasts hardship." Ethan turned it in his hand, pretending interest, but inside he thought, "It's just a piece of wood." When he set it back down, his watch strap caught the edge, knocking it to the floor. The heart cracked in half with a dull snap. The room went still. Lila gasped softly. Ethan froze, guilt flickering across his face for the first time. I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" But her father was already picking up the pieces. "It's all right," he said gently. "Things break. What matters is that we care enough to fix them." Ethan nodded stiffly, unsure why those simple words made his chest tighten. Later that night, Lila stood by the window, staring at the moonlight over the fields. Ethan joined her, silent for a moment. "I didn't mean to break it," he said. "I know," she whispered. "But sometimes, Ethan, you don't see what's fragile until it's already in pieces." He turned away, unable to face her eyes. Somewhere deep inside, something began to stir. Not guilt, not yet remorse, but the faint crack in his own armor. The next morning, as they prepared for another day with her family, Lila's grandmother watched him closely from her chair. She saw it, that flicker of conflict in his proud face, and she smiled softly to herself. Sometimes, she knew, the hardest hearts were only waiting to break, so they could finally learn how to heal. The sun had barely set when the Turner family gathered around the long wooden table. Candles flickered, casting a warm glow across the worn dishes and home-cooked food. Lila's father sat at the head, his face glowing with quiet pride. "Before we eat," he said, raising his glass of sweet tea, "I want to thank the good Lord for family. 60 years on this earth, and I've learned one thing. Love keeps you rich, even when your pockets are empty." Everyone clapped softly, smiling at his words. Everyone, except Ethan. He sat rigid, his tie still tight around his neck, though everyone else had loosened theirs. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he glanced at it quickly, earning a gentle frown from Lila. "Ethan," her father said kindly, "why don't you say a few words? You've done well for yourself. Maybe share some wisdom with us old folks." Ethan gave a short, polite laugh. "Oh, I don't know about wisdom. Just hard work, I guess. Not much time for long prayers or lazy afternoons." The table fell silent for a heartbeat. Then Tom chuckled awkwardly. "Well, we work hard too, just not in an office." Ethan leaned back, a hint of a smirk on his lips. "I'm sure you do, Tom, though success doesn't exactly run in this family, does it?" The room froze. Even the crickets outside seemed to stop. Lila's father's eyes lowered, and her mother's hand tightened on her napkin. "Ethan," Lila said quietly, her voice trembling. "That wasn't necessary," he shrugged. "I'm just saying, maybe some people are meant for simple things. Farming, fixing cars, living small. Nothing wrong with that," her father forced a smile, his voice soft but steady. "There's nothing small about an honest life, son." Lila's grandmother's eyes glimmered in the candlelight. "Pride blinds faster than darkness," she murmured. Ethan's smirk faltered. For a second, guilt flashed across his face, but only for a second. "I didn't mean to offend anyone," he said, standing up. "It's just different worlds, that's all." Lila's voice shook now. "Different worlds? Ethan, these are my parents. The people who raised me with love you can't even begin to understand." He turned toward her, his tone sharp. "Oh, don't start this again, Lila. You've been embarrassed about where you came from since we met. I'm just the only one honest enough to admit it." The words hit her like a slap. She pushed back her chair, her eyes shining with tears. "You mock the people who love you most," she said, her voice breaking. "You think money makes you better? It's made you smaller." Her father started to stand, but she held up her hand. "No, Dad. He needs to hear this." Ethan looked away, jaw tight, pretending her words didn't sting. But inside, something trembled. "I've tried," Lila continued softly. "I've tried to help you see how much kindness lives in this house. How much love. But you look at my family like they're beneath you. You look at me that way, too." Her voice cracked, and she turned toward the door. "I can't do this tonight." Ethan's chest tightened. The room was suffocating. He couldn't bear the weight of their silent eyes, the disappointment, the pity. He grabbed his keys from the counter. "I'm leaving," he said flatly. "I'll drive back to the city. You can stay and play perfect daughter." "Ethan," Lila started, but he was already heading for the door. The storm outside had rolled in fast. Rain lashed against the porch, and thunder rumbled in the distance. He stepped out, the wind tugging at his jacket, and slammed the door behind him. Inside, Lila's mother whispered a prayer under her breath. Her father put an arm around her shoulders. "He'll come around," he said quietly, though even he didn't sound sure. The night was black as ink. Ethan's headlights cut through sheets of rain as he sped down the winding road. His mind replayed Lila's words again and again. "You mock the people who love you most." He clenched the steering wheel, his jaw set. "I don't need them," he muttered. "I don't need any of them." But even as he said it, a hollow ache spread through his chest. The truth echoed louder than the thunder. He did need them. He just didn't know how to admit it. Lightning flashed, revealing the narrow road curving sharply ahead. A deer darted across the headlights. Ethan swore under his breath, jerking the wheel hard to the right. The tires screamed. The car skidded, spinning out of control. The world tilted. Metal crunched, glass shattered, and everything went white. Then, silence. Rain poured down, dripping through the shattered windshield. The car lay crumpled at the bottom of a shallow ravine, half hidden by mud and branches. Inside, Ethan's body was still, his face pale beneath streaks of blood and rain. The storm raged on above, wild and merciless. Back at the farmhouse, Lila stood by the window, her heart uneasy. "He shouldn't have driven out in this weather," she whispered. Her grandmother looked up from her chair, eyes distant but certain. "Pride will take a man far," she said softly. "But love will always be what brings him home." Outside, thunder rolled again, deep and endless, as if the heavens themselves mourned the man who was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life. The storm roared through the night, tearing across the open fields like an angry sea. The wind howled against the farmhouse windows, and rain hammered the tin roof. Inside, Lila paced the living room, wringing her hands. Her eyes darted to the clock every few seconds. Midnight had come and gone, and Ethan still hadn't returned. Her father sat near the door, already pulling on his old work boots. "He should have been back by now," he said firmly. "This storm's no place for driving." "I told him not to go," Lila whispered, her voice trembling. "He was angry." "I should have stopped him." Her grandmother looked up from her rocking chair, her eyes calm but knowing. "You can't stop a man running from his own pride, child. But love can still follow him." Tom grabbed his flashlight from the counter. "Dad, I'll take the truck." "You ride with me," Lila's father nodded. "Stay here, sweetheart. If he's on that road, we'll find him." Lila shook her head. "No, I'm coming too." But her father's voice was firm. "You stay. If we find him, we'll bring him home." She didn't argue. She couldn't. She just stood by the window, staring into the rain as the truck's headlights disappeared into the darkness. The back roads were rivers now, the mud swallowing their tires as thunder rolled above. Tom gripped the steering wheel tightly. "You think he took the highway?" His father shook his head. "He's not familiar with these roads. He'd take the old bridge." They turned onto the narrow road leading through the ravine, branches whipping against the windshield. Then, through the sheets of rain, the beam of their headlights caught something glinting in the ditch below. "Stop!" his father shouted. The truck screeched to a halt. They jumped out into the storm, rain soaking them instantly. The beam of Tom's flashlight swept across twisted metal. Ethan's car, crushed against a fallen tree. "Ethan!" Lila's father yelled, scrambling down the muddy slope. "Can you hear me, son?" No answer. Only the sound of rain hitting metal. Tom reached the driver's side first. The windshield was shattered, the airbag deflated, glass everywhere. Ethan's body slumped against the steering wheel, motionless. Blood streaked his temple. "Dad, he's alive!" Tom gasped after checking his pulse. "Barely, but he's alive." "Then we're not leaving him here," his father said. He yanked at the door, but it was jammed. Without hesitation, Tom picked up a rock and smashed what was left of the side window. The glass sliced through his arm, but he didn't stop. Together, they pulled at the twisted door until it gave way. Rainwater poured into the car. Ethan groaned faintly, his eyes fluttering open for a moment, confused, dazed. "Lila," he whispered weakly. "Don't try to talk," Tom said. "We've got you." They slid him out carefully, avoiding the shards of metal. The mud was deep, sucking at their boots as they climbed the hill. Lila's father lifted Ethan's body over his shoulders, carrying him like a man carries his own son. "Come on!" he shouted over the storm. "Let's get him home." The truck's tires spun in the mud as they made their way back toward the farmhouse. Every bump made Ethan moan in pain, but he was alive, and that was all that mattered. When they arrived, Lila ran out the door before the truck even stopped. "Ethan!" she cried, her voice breaking as she saw his pale, bloodied face. "Get blankets!" her father commanded. "Tom, help me get him inside." They laid him on the couch near the fire. His breathing was shallow, his lips pale. Lila knelt beside him, her tears mixing with the rain still dripping from his hair. Her grandmother placed a trembling hand on Ethan's forehead. "He's cold. Get the lanterns, child. We need light." They worked through the night, cleaning his wounds, wrapping his head, pressing claws to stop the bleeding. Lila's mother boiled water for tea and soup, her hands shaking but steady in purpose. At one point, Ethan stirred, his voice weak and slurred. "Why? Why did you help me?" Lila's father looked at him with steady eyes. "Because you're family. That's what we do." Ethan turned his head slightly, his lips trembling. He didn't have the strength to reply, but his eyes filled with tears, silent, heavy tears of shame and gratitude. Hours passed. The storm finally eased, leaving the world washed clean and quiet. Morning light crept through the curtains, painting the room in soft gold. Ethan lay half awake, his body aching but alive. He could hear the faint sounds of the family in the kitchen. Soft laughter, the clinking of cups, the sound of life continuing. He turned his head and saw Lila dozing beside him, her hand resting gently on his arm. Her face was tired, her eyes swollen from crying. He whispered her name. "Lila?" Her eyes opened instantly. "Ethan? You're awake." He swallowed hard, his voice rough. "You stayed." "Of course," she said softly. "We all did." A tear slipped down his cheek. "I don't deserve that." From across the room, Lila's grandmother looked up from her chair. Her voice was low but firm. "You are loved, even when you don't deserve it." Those words broke something inside him. Not his pride, but the wall that pride had built. He closed his eyes and began to cry quietly, his shoulders shaking. Lila leaned closer, holding his hand, and for the first time, he didn't pull away. Over the next few days, Ethan grew stronger. The family took turns caring for him, feeding him soup, changing his bandages, and keeping him warm. Every act of kindness chipped away at the man he used to be. He watched as Tom fixed the broken truck outside, humming while rain dripped from the roof. He saw Lila's father come in from the fields each morning, hands rough but eyes gentle. He saw Layla laugh with her mother in the kitchen, joy shining through her weariness. They were everything he wasn't. Selfless, forgiving, alive. One night, as the fire crackled low, Ethan whispered to Lila, "I don't understand how they can forgive me after everything I said." She smiled softly. "Because love isn't about keeping score, it's about showing grace." He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes glistening. "Then maybe it's time I learn how." Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The stars shone bright over the fields, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt something he hadn't known he was missing. Peace. The same family he had mocked had carried him from the edge of death, and as he drifted to sleep that night, his last thought was simple, but true. They didn't just save my life. They saved my soul. The storm had passed days ago, but its memory still lingered. In the soaked fields, in the muddy roads, and in the quiet heaviness that hung in the Turner farmhouse. Ethan sat by the window, his arm in a sling, a faded quilt draped over his shoulders. The light of early morning filtered through the lace curtains, painting soft patterns across his face. He had spent a week healing, not just his body, but his spirit. Every creak of the wooden floor, every laugh from the kitchen, every gentle gesture from Lila's family chipped away at the walls he'd built around himself. He had never known a love that didn't demand something in return, a love that gave without expecting gratitude or gain. Now, sitting there, he wondered how he had gone so long without seeing it. Lila entered quietly, carrying a steaming mug of coffee. "You're up early," she said, offering a small smile. He nodded, his voice rough from sleep. "Couldn't rest. Been thinking." She handed him the mug and sat beside him. "About what?" He looked out the window, where the sun was rising over the fields, gold light spilling across rows of wet soil. "About how blind I was. About how much I hurt you." Her eyes softened, but she didn't speak. He took a slow breath. "When I crashed that night, all I could think about was you. The things I said, the way I made your family feel small." His voice cracked. "They saved me anyway. I don't understand it." Lila reached for his hand. "You don't have to understand it, Ethan. Just accept it." He squeezed her hand gently. "I want to do more than that. I want to be better. For you, for them, for myself." Later that day, Ethan stepped outside for the first time since the accident. The air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of wet grass and earth. He could hear the hum of bees in the garden, the distant laughter of Tom fixing something by the shed. Lila's father was in the field, checking the fences. Ethan hesitated before walking toward him. "Mr. Turner," he called softly. The older man turned, his expression unreadable. "Morning, son." Ethan swallowed hard. I wanted to say thank you. For that night. For saving me." Mr. Turner studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Wasn't just me. Tom was there too. Family does what it has to." Ethan lowered his head. "I don't know if I deserve to be called family after the way I spoke to you." The old man leaned on the fence post, his voice calm but steady. "We all say things we regret when pride's doing the talking. What matters is what we say after." Ethan's throat tightened. "Then let me say this. I'm sorry. For the words I said. For the way I looked down on you. You're the kind of man I should have been learning from. Not judging." Mr. Turner looked out across the field, then back at him. "You know, I've worked this land 40 years. Learned something about storms. They don't just destroy, son. Sometimes they clear the air." Ethan felt tears burn at the corners of his eyes. "I'd like to earn your respect. Whatever that takes," the old man smiled faintly. "You already started." He patted Ethan's shoulder. "Now come on, let's put those city hands to work." The days that followed were simple but full. Ethan helped mend fences, shovel mud, and feed the animals. His body ached, but his heart felt lighter with every sunrise. He laughed with Tom over broken tools, shared coffee with Mrs. Turner at dawn, and listened to Lila hum softly while hanging laundry in the breeze. The rhythms of their life, humble, steady, honest, began to shape him in ways money never had. At night, he'd sit by the fire with Lila, talking quietly about the future, not about careers or investments, but about peace, purpose, and home. One evening, he looked at her across the flickering firelight and said softly, "I used to think success was measured by what I owned, but now I see. It's measured by who I've become." She smiled through tears. "And who do you think you're becoming?" He looked at her hand in his, the warmth of her touch grounding him. A man worth loving. A week later, Ethan stood in the kitchen, the morning sun spilling across the table. The family had gathered for breakfast, laughter and the smell of pancakes filling the air. He cleared his throat, suddenly nervous. I've been thinking a lot about what comes next. Everyone turned to listen. I've decided to sell the condo in the city, he said, his voice steady. The company can manage without me for a while. I want to stay here, help around the farm, maybe learn a few things. Tom grinned. You sure about that? It's not exactly corporate life, Ethan smiled. That's the point. Lila's mother clasped her hands together, her eyes misty. You're always welcome here, son. Ethan looked around the table, at the family he once mocked, the people who had become his saving grace. His chest swelled with gratitude that words could barely hold. He reached for Lila's hand and met her gaze. You were right, he said softly. Love really does make you rich, even when your pockets are empty. Lila squeezed his hand. And forgiveness fills the rest. As summer turned to autumn, the Turner farm bloomed again. The air grew cool, the fields gold with harvest, and in the middle of it all, Ethan found peace. Not in wealth or power, but in belonging. He still carried the scars from the crash, faint lines along his arm and temple. But to him, they were reminders of grace, proof that even broken things can be rebuilt. Sometimes, at dusk, he'd stand at the edge of the field, watching the sun sink behind the hills. The farmhouse glowed in the distance, laughter spilling through its windows. He'd whisper to himself, almost in prayer, They saved my life, and they saved my heart. Months later, on a quiet Sunday morning, the family gathered again around that same long wooden table. The same candles flickered. The same laughter filled the air. But this time, Ethan's place was not on the outside looking in. He carved the roast, passing plates, his face warm with contentment. Lila's grandmother smiled at him knowingly. You see, child, she said, storms come and go, but love is what teaches us how to rebuild. Ethan nodded, his voice soft and sure. And this time I'll never take it for granted. Months passed, and the world outside moved on. But something inside Ethan Turner had changed forever. The man who once chased status and approval now found peace in simplicity. The rush for power had faded, replaced by a calm gratitude that colored everything he touched. When he and Lila returned to the city, it felt different. Smaller somehow. Colder. Emptier. The tall buildings that once made him proud now just looked like glass cages, reflecting back a man he no longer wanted to be. He stood by the window of their apartment one morning, looking down at the traffic crawling below. He'd put on his suit again, ready for another day in the office, but his reflection in the glass felt like a stranger's. Lila came up behind him, her arms wrapping gently around his waist. You don't have to go back if you're not ready, she whispered. He smiled faintly. I have to, but not in the way I used to. When Ethan stepped into his company headquarters for the first time in months, the polished floors and sharp suits no longer impressed him. The air buzzed with ambition, deadlines, and self-importance. The same things he once lived for. Ethan Turner. One of his colleagues called out, clapping him on the back. Heard you had a rough patch. Good to have you back. Ready to dive into the next big deal? Ethan smiled, but there was no hunger in his eyes anymore. Actually, he said quietly, I think it's time I worked on something that matters. The man frowned. You mean charity work? Ethan nodded. Something like that. By the end of that week, he had submitted his resignation. The decision shocked everyone. The company's rising star walking away without a scandal or a second thought. But Ethan didn't need applause anymore. He had finally learned that peace doesn't shout, it whispers. A few months later, a small headline appeared in the local newspaper. Former executive launches Rural Outreach Fund to support struggling farmers. The article included a photo, Ethan, in rolled-up sleeves and worn boots, standing beside Lila's father and brother. Their hands were dirty, their smiles real. The foundation, named the Turner Family Fund, provided grants to rural families for medical needs, education, and farming supplies. Ethan visited villages, shook hands with farmers, and listened, really listened, to their stories. Each time he drove past a small house or a field, he thought of the night he nearly lost his life, and the people who saved it without expecting anything in return. That gratitude became his purpose. A year later, the family gathered once again at the farmhouse, this time for another birthday celebration. The table was full, the air rich with the smell of home-cooked food, and laughter that filled every corner. Lila's father sat at the head of the table, his eyes bright with pride. 61, he said with a grin. Didn't think I'd have this much company at my age, Ethan chuckled. You've earned every bit of it. He reached into his pocket and placed something on the table. It was the small wooden heart, the same one he had broken months ago. Its cracks were now barely visible, carefully mended with glue and love. He set it in the center of the table. This belongs here, he said softly. The room went quiet. Everyone stared at the heart, not as a piece of wood, but as a story, a symbol of everything that had been lost and rebuilt. Lila's eyes shimmered with tears. She reached across the table and took Ethan's hand. You brought it back, she whispered. He smiled. No, you all did, her grandmother nodded approvingly. The heart is like a man's spirit, she said. It may break, but if love mends it, it becomes stronger than before. As evening fell, the family sat outside on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The fields glowed gold, the air filled with crickets, and the scent of soil after rain. Ethan sat beside Lila, his arm around her shoulders. You know, he murmured, I used to think I had everything, but I was empty. She leaned against him. And now? He looked at her, smiling softly. Now I have less, but I've never been richer. The camera of life, or fate, could have stopped there, capturing a man at peace. But the truth of redemption isn't loud. It lives in quiet moments, in the way Ethan listened more than he spoke, worked more than he boasted, loved more than he judged. And as the farmhouse lights flickered warm against the coming night, one thing was certain. The man who once mocked love had learned to live by it. The morning light poured through the farmhouse window, soft and golden, resting on the mantel where the small wooden heart now sat proudly. Its surface was smooth again, the cracks faint but still visible. A quiet reminder that broken things can become beautiful again. Ethan stood in front of it, hands in his pockets, his reflection shimmering faintly in the glass behind it. He stared at that heart, the way a man might look at an old photograph. Not just to see it, but to feel everything it represented. It wasn't just a carving anymore. It was his story, his fall, his redemption, his reminder. He thought back to the man he used to be, the one who cared about appearances, status, and what others thought. That man had been polished on the outside and hollow on the inside. He had mocked the very people who showed him what love truly meant. He had chased wealth, but ignored worth. Now, standing in that small farmhouse surrounded by laughter and life, Ethan understood something he had never grasped before. The measure of a man isn't in his paycheck or his title. It's in how he loves when no one's watching. It's in how he forgives, how he humbles himself, how he chooses to build rather than break. Lila walked into the room, her hair tied loosely, her hands dusted with flour. You're quiet, she said softly, stepping beside him. Ethan smiled faintly. Just thinking about how far we've come. She looked at the heart on the mantel. It's still beautiful, isn't it? More than before, he said. The cracks give it character. Kind of like us, she laughed gently. Then I guess we're both stronger now. He turned to her, his eyes full of warmth. No, he said. You were strong all along. I just had to learn from you. And from them. Lila rested her head on his shoulder. You did more than learn, Ethan. You changed. And that's what matters. Outside, the day stretched wide and golden. Lila's father and brother worked in the fields. Their voices carried on the wind. The smell of fresh bread floated from the kitchen. Somewhere her grandmother hummed a hymn. A soft, steady melody that seemed to fill the air with peace. Ethan stepped out onto the porch, taking in the view. His heart was quiet now. Not restless, not proud, just grateful. He whispered to himself, as if offering a prayer. I once thought wealth made me powerful. But love, humble, forgiving, and enduring, is what truly saved my life. The wind stirred through the tall grass, as if nature itself was answering. As the scene closed, sunlight streamed through the windows and caught the wooden heart, its repaired seams glowing like golden veins. In that glow lived the truth of Ethan's journey, that no man is too proud to be broken, and no heart too damaged to be rebuilt. Love had done what pride never could. It had healed. And somewhere in that quiet farmhouse, surrounded by the laughter of the family he once disdained, Ethan finally became the man he was always meant to be. Not perfect, not powerful, but whole,